It's 6 o'clock and we have a quorum, so I'll call this meeting of the Greenfield Planning Board to order at 6 o'clock. And the first order, well, before we get to the minutes, I just want to do introductions so that folks here and also folks participating virtually or who might hear the recording will know who we are. My name is George Columpsis. I'm the Planning Board Chair.
Victor Michelle, clerk.
My name is Sarah Brown Jansen. I'm a member.
And my name is Eric Twarg, and I'm the Director of Planning and Development.
Peter MacGyver, Planning Board member.
Thank you. And we do have a guest this evening, but you can introduce when you come up with the item, if that's okay. Great. So next is the approval of the meeting minutes of July 18th. Is there a motion to approve?
The correction that I made to
Yep, we'll get to that as soon as we get a motion. And we'll get to the question. Thank you. So is that a motion? Thanks.
Second.
Thank you. Yes, discussion.
we had one correction. I'm not the chairperson. I'm the clerk.
Yeah. Thank you. Guys.
Over to Eric already.
Yep, been corrected. Thank you for that catch.
Any other
Copy and pasting.
discussion on the minutes?
I have a correction. I was absent. I was not present.
Okay.
Oh, I need to do it.
Good catch.
Yeah.
I had a few things on the motion for reorganization, Eric.
Yes.
I thought it would make more sense to have moved by so-and-so to nominate and voted to elect.
Add the words "and voted to elect."
And yeah, so moved to nominate and then voted to elect. That seemed more clear. Few other minor things. Page 4, about the middle, where Jeff said stated the maximizing density. Near the end of that sentence, it should be, I think, maximize should be the word, willing to maximize, not maximum. See what I'm talking about? Middle is,
Yes, I see that.
okay.
Did that.
Page 6, third line down, just missing a T, willing to.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, I said, ask the applicants if they are willing to.
What page is that?
Oh, I'm sorry, page 6. 6.
And what line?
My.
Oh, willing to with a T right there.
And I believe when this is on page 9, sorry, the bottom of page 9, when I referenced the deliberations about the MDR proposals, I believe I said during those deliberations, the third line from the bottom, it says the city council made it clear. I think what I had said and what I meant to say was a city councilor made it clear that they would be, there was one specific councilor who made that comment. I didn't get a sense of this for consensus of the board. The council rather. Near the top of that page, there's an extra apostrophe on the 7th line down near the end after wouldn't. See that?
The 7th line down on D.
7th line down near the end. So it's wouldn't.
Oh, yes.
After that. You can tell me if I'm being too particular.
No.
And and on the last page, top line, planning board would like to discuss the possibility of seeing projects, I think plural, early on.
Yes.
That's it. Me, any other discussion? Hearing none. All planning board members in favor of approving those edits?
Aye.
Thank you.
I will abstain because I'm not there.
Thank you very much. Jump the gun. Okay, the next is we have a discussion item. Planning board discussion on the Department of Public Works FY25 Cool Corridors Grant Program application to the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. And there's going to be a presenter for that, sir.
The two of us to elect or set the table or?
Yeah, welcome to, like, we'll share up. Yeah. Or that. Just, you know, the planning board did receive all the materials.
Okay, good news.
If you could introduce yourself, then take it away.
I'm Athena Lee Bradley. I'm the grant writer manager for the city of Greenfield.
Mary Chickwin, Chair of Greenfield Tree Committee.
And we are here because Mary brought this wonderful grant to our attention, and it's the Massachusetts School Corridors Grant. It's for planting trees and other associated things to help mitigate climate change, particularly heating urban areas. So our proposal, and I'll let Mary explain the nitty-gritty details, is to plant trees in the Sanderson and Beacon Street areas, which is an environmental justice area. And we are proposing to plant predominantly along the beltways there. And we have done this, we've met with DPW. We're doing it in conjunction with our tree warden, Paul Newell, and with Eric from Plant. And we also have partners with the Greenfield Middle School, who obviously is a public entity, but we wanted to assure them about the trees on their property because we are planning to plant on their property. And then also the Bay State Franklin Medical Center. And we met with the engineering and facilities manager there. And then also the Blessed Trinity Church Parish. Yes.
Yeah.
And so I spoke with the deacon this afternoon, and we have letters of endorsement from all three of them.
So I didn't know if you were already having reviewed the planting plan and just had questions for us, or if you'd like me to say anything additional about the proposal.
It's pretty thorough. We got the summary, and we also got the whole grant
Right,
application
right.
itself. So planning board,
I'd be glad to just add that this is an area that has been a priority planting area for Greenfield Tree Committee for several years now. But we haven't had the capacity or the funding to target this area. But as if you read the proposal, it's an area that has extremely low tree cover, only 7%, and high impervious surfaces, 70%. And it also shows up on a variety of maps as hot spots and severe heat island effect. So it's definitely an area that we really have wanted to plant at, and to have this extra capacity of partnering with the city and then getting buy-in from all. I'm frankly really, well, I'll just say I'm very pleased that we got buy-in from all three of the entities that we approached to plant on their properties as well. So in all, we're planting approximately 71 trees. The numbers switch just slightly, but it doesn't affect the public tree planting. Primarily native species and their cultivars, chosen to be mindful of those that are under power lines or those that are in tight areas, such as along Sanderson Street, along the factory there. Let's see what else. I think that kind of sums it up. And the most exciting part of the grant is that the grant pays for a contractor to do the work, and there's no match for the city. So it seems very clear that it's a wonderful opportunity.
It's a 2-year funding horizon, which will pay for all the planting, plus watering and maintenance for 2 full years.
Yeah.
And then we'll supplement that as needed. Mary's going to work with Mary and Paul will work with volunteers and do some training with them. We also want to do some public outreach on the importance of shade trees and native plants and species for climate change mitigation. Yeah.
thank you both. Board members have any questions or comments?
Sure. You had Debbie Downer on this one, but I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
This is taxpayer money, correct?
It's coming from
From the state?
DEA,
It's
yes.
taxpayer money. These are private properties, correct? Except for the
Not
school?
entirely,
Except for
no.
the school, right? The church, the hospital.
All of
Private-
Well, they're nonprofits.
They're private property, they're not public.
Yes, that's why we have a letter of endorsement.
Well, I guess my question is, why are we spending taxpayer money on private properties?
Yeah, so I believe, I may be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure that the Mass General Law allows for the planting of public shade trees on private property as long as they are within a sort of 25-foot or so setback, so that they still have public benefits. So that's how this works. And EEA specifically says that they can be planted on private property as long as the property owner provides a letter of support.
So we couldn't find a public space or something more.
Well, the bulk of the trees are on the beltways. That's pretty much like.
And I'd also like to, if we go ahead and approve this, I'd like to have it where next year and the year after, there's another image done like you've done in the back here. See if it actually does anything. Because where I look at where the trees are going, they're not going anywhere near the impervious surfaces to cover any of those to help shade them, which is what's collecting the heat.
Well, the beltways will be on the side.
I'd like to see what the difference is.
Yeah, yes, sir.
I think that's a reasonable thing to do because, yeah, we're spending taxpayer money on something that I would rather see them pay for the trees and work away, or maybe they could deal with them. Say, look, we've identified your space here as a hotspot. How can you help us? As opposed to taking taxpayer money.
Well, the church is kind of a foundation of that neighborhood, so I know a lot of the people there are residents.
Yeah, I see what you're trying to do.
And it's
here.
same with the hospital. I mean, obviously, there are hundreds of our
Our
residents.
deficit is $47 trillion.
Yeah.
Every
No, I
little
get
bit we
that.
add to it makes it worse.
I know.
So,
Could I
Appreciate
Could
that.
I respond to your question?
Sure.
So on the corner of Beacon and Federal, the trees that are in the sort of red color,
Yep.
there is not a tree belt, a public tree belt wide enough to accommodate trees there. Plus it would be planting trees, even if there were that close to that stop sign, would not be something that the tree warden would approve. So that's why those are there. Additionally, let's see, where are the other ones?
I can see though, we're planting all the trees, and most of them are running along the roads. You've got a few spotted inside the grounds of the hospital. But once again, they're already where there's green spaces. So you're planting them along the large green. So you're not going to add any additional shade to those areas. The problem is all of the parking lots. And I understand, look, I understand the issue. I'm just not sure if the money is being spent in a way that's going to actually make a difference. So I'd like to see that in the future.
Uh-huh.
And
Can I just say, I wanted to continue.
of course,
So there's also the helicopter landing pad there. So there was quite a wide swath that we had to avoid. There's also a huge, you might probably know this, there's also a huge solar array on the back of the church. So even if we wanted to try to address what you're saying about planting and parking lots, that was off limits. So there's quite a few constraints that were not made obvious by this planting plan. Additionally, we wanted to really get some shade on the east and south side of this middle school, because they do have a nice tree planting along Federal Street, but where the kids play, there's absolutely nothing. And between the ball field, sight lines for the teachers to be able to see who's on the field, the helicopter pad, and a loading dock, we were unable to find any spots to plant trees to put shade on that particular surface.
And we did discuss doing white paint on the asphalt for cooling benefits, and that wasn't the thing that was entertained either. Just junk. Yeah.
Before asking for more comments or questions, I just want to make the procedural point. The planning board's role in this, excuse me, is only to potentially approve the trees that are going on public property.
Correct.
Nothing to do with the private property.
Well, I did write a letter, and they do want, I think, approval for the whole application of the planting plan, which does include the private, the hospital and the.
A little different than what I read.
Yeah, I
Or
think
the cover letter. Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
Other board members have questions or comments?
So just to clarify, if we, this comes up later in the meeting as an action item. So what action are you looking for?
Approval of the application, and I do have a letter for signature, which I'll get put on letterhead somehow. I'm sorry, because the church applied, got me their letters late and approval late, so I was late in getting everything else done because I had to get other letters out. And then your other meeting was before we even had met about the actual plan, so we've been working on since then, so, and that's why we're late.
I understand that the deadline is 4 o'clock tomorrow.
Yes.
So if the board were to approve this,
yes,
I would need to sign up and have it
Yes.
before that time.
please.
Probably before doing that. But I do have a letter drafted and I did email it to Eric and so we can get it on letterhead and I don't know if you've got a digital signature or I can.
Sure, we can work out the
Yes,
logistics,
sir.
yeah. Any other board members, comments or questions about the proposal?
I have a quick question. I'm just trying to find the mock-up number so you know what I'm referring to. I think it's mock-up number 4 for the middle school trees. And it's the trees that are in the tree belt. And I'm curious if there was any consideration that could be given to moving those further to the field side so that they're not planted directly underneath of the power lines.
Yeah, so we were trying to maximize trees in that area, both small and large trees. So it's hard to see in this mock-up, which I admit is not the best ever, but there are actually 4 shade trees that are going inside the power lines there. And then there's a row of smaller stature trees that are approved by the state for planting underneath power lines. And in that particular area, even though Sanderson Street was just redone, there has been flooding, surface flooding during high rain events. So we're just trying to maximize the amount of tree cover possible there. And we're also up against the edge of the ball field. So it's tight quarters there.
And that smaller tree, again, I don't ask this as criticism, just for point information. Those smaller trees are the same that are used on the Beacon Street properties?
It's the same or similar, yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Under the power lines.
But
correct.
shorter in nature.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, the middle school was not in favor of having anything encroaching too much on their field. Understandable because of the game walking.
That it for you, Peter? Or?
Yeah, other than, nice work on putting the grant together, and money to the city is always a positive. So appreciate your hard work.
Any other comments or questions? All right, so we'll, as Sarah was mentioning, we'll be voting on this a bit, deliberating and voting on this a bit later this evening. And we'll work out the logistics of if it gets approved.
Great. Yes. Thank you all for reviewing the materials. I know it was a long read, so we really appreciate it.
Thanks for hard work. Appreciate it.
Nice to be here and not been here one of your meetings.
Oh, nice.
Do you need us to be present for the deliberation, or is that now you're? Oh, you will. Okay.
I would assume it's necessary, but it's up to you if you would choose to. So
it's not necessary.
I would. Oh no, it's not
okay,
necessary.
Great.
No.
Thanks.
No, I have all of our numbers.
Thanks. We've asked what we needed to ask now.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, so moving on to the next discussion item, which is planning board discussion of the proposed amendments to the open space / cluster development ordinance. So this is something that the board has been working on for 2 years, and we've been working in collaboration with Allison Gage of FERCog, who just came on. Thank you very much, Allison. And just for board members update, at the last meeting, we had had the sense, as long as we got the updated, materials from Allison, we wouldn't need her to attend. But I know when I was looking over the materials which we got yesterday, a somewhat significant question. I was able to reach Allison, and rather than her giving input to me and me bringing it to the board, I wanted us to have a direct collaboration with her. So thank you very much, Allison, for your flexibility.
Yeah, no,
to join us.
Yeah, I know you said I didn't have to attend, but then I made a mistake. So,
so let me give a little context for board members and for the public listening of why it asked you to come. And this is obviously something that we're potentially going to deliberate on and initiate later this evening as well. And I should mention too that as far as the board initiating this, it's somewhat time sensitive because our is a contract or agreement with FERCog on this project is ending in September.
September.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And so
the
we
grant
wanted
from
to
the
have you,
DEP.
say again?
The grant from the DEP expires at the end of September.
Thank you. And we're hoping for you to be involved with the joint public hearing with the Economic Development Committee of the council, as well as the council meeting on this, because there's so much detail and your expertise has been so important about this. So that's why it's time sensitive. We wanted to, be able to act on this tonight. So the issue that had come up to me is for board members, it's related to the net acreage calculation, and I'll direct you to page 3 on what Allison says. It's item F. And what my recollection is of our process and our discussion is that Jeff Sauser, who couldn't be here tonight, had come up with the suggestion that in considering how we're going to calculate the land, we should give credit for, or shouldn't discount areas too much with slopes or wetlands, because one thing we're trying to value here is habitat. And so those things are habitat, even though they're not a place to, go jogging or play frisbee or something like that. So we had talked about reducing the way in which that's calculated as far as the net acreage. And so again, that's under item F. And Allison, I'll call you in just a second, but you had adjusted F1A to go from 50% of the acreage of land with slopes of 20% or greater, from 50% to 10%. I think in response to that conversation.
Correct.
And then the next item, B, is the total acreage of land subject to easements or restrictions of development like lakes, ponds, vernal pools, floodplains, et cetera. So when I saw this, my thought was we also had wanted to adjust that area, that topic. You're
Yes,
recollecting the
that's
same
right.
thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
We didn't feel that any of the land should be completely taken out of the calculation because you're still protecting it.
Right.
It's a wetland, okay, so, and the same with the slope. So we felt it shall be included and that's reduced a little bit, as opposed to completely eliminated. That's how I remember it.
Yes, me too. And so what I was thinking is, rather than just as the previous item went from 50 to 10%, this one should go from 100% or total acreage to some other percentage. And I guess that's what we're here to discuss and try to, get some perspective on.
Yeah, I apologize. I conflated that and only amended part A. So for part B, if you're leaving it, or communities usually leave it at that 100% of the total acreage if they're trying to get the total number of units closer to what a typical subdivision would result in. So if our goal is to try and allow for more housing, then I would recommend doing it 50% of the 50% of that acreage or lower, similar to what we did for the soils. And I would leave that up to you all.
Thank you, Alice. Do you have any experience or precedent of something?
No,
like that?
I looked through a handful of other of the zoning bylaws of communities who have adopted this, and none of them had lowered that threshold from 100%. So, which was interesting, but not helpful for us. So I would say it would be okay to do 50% or less.
The same as we did for the slopes.
Well, why don't you, just want to make sure everybody can hear.
Why don't we do the same as we did for the slopes?
So make it for 10%?
10%. Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're still including some of it.
Yeah. I
Which
think that's
helps.
also the other thing that we want to be mindful of is making the calculation as simple as possible for developers. So if it's just a clean 10%, 10%, and then I
Yep.
think part C is 10% for roads and
Yep.
utilities. So I think that would work well.
My thought.
Thanks. So I'll call myself, that would seem like a dramatic difference from 100%.
Yeah, but it's also in thinking of the map of that area of Greenfield, there's not I think it would be okay. It's not like there's a ton of floodplain in that area that would likely be subdivided. So I don't think it'll make a drastic difference, but
Thank you, helpful. Other questions for Allison from board members? About this particular area? We'll deliberate later, of course, but
Mhm.
all Allison's here. Didn't know if there's other. And I'll expand it that while Allison is here, if there was anything else about the other changes that she documented, which were things we had settled on. Mostly those were in the uh, density bonus section. Just want to double check.
It was squared that way.
Peter, are anything wrong? Yeah.
Great. So my understanding of the process is you'll deliberate later on in this meeting and then you'd be in touch about holding the joint public hearing.
Correct.
Okay. All right, that sounds great.
All right, Allison, thank you once again.
Thank you.
For your
Good
help
night.
and your flexibility.
Of course. Sorry about that. Good night.
Okay, take care. The next item is planning board discussion of proposed zoning amendments, and there are five. Oh, take them one at a time. To first allow multifamily dwellings by right with site plan review in the semi-residential zone. Second one is to raise the maximum number of units allowed in new multifamily dwellings. Third is to amend zoning ordinance 200-7.10 to allow first floor dwellings in mixed-use lots. Fourth is revise dimensional regulations to allow row houses in the central commercial, general commercial, semi-residential, and urban residential zones. And fifth is to consider allowing detached accessory dwelling units by right in all zones. And just to give a little context to this, Eric, I know you had collaborated or conferred with me about including this, and this had come to some degree from discussion at the SGIC, the Master Plan Implementation Committee discussion, and also Councilor Garrett, you had put some of these forward and into that discussion. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. Yes. Yes. So I appreciate you being here to participate in the discussion of these. So we can just take them in order. And I did want to say this is obviously not a public hearing, but we did get some input from members of the public. And if, you know, this is an initial discussion of these things. They haven't come before the board previously. And if members of the public have some input about this, be open to hearing it. So, so the first one, again, is allow multifamily dwellings by right with site plan review in semi-residential zone. Councilor Garrett, did you want to offer a perspective, or do board members want to offer?
I have a question.
Please.
Eric, what does by right, what does designate something by right eliminate? What step does it eliminate in the process of building something?
It doesn't require a special permit.
It doesn't require a special
It
permit.
says by right, it means no special permits required.
Okay, but it still apply, all the zoning and regulations and everything else apply to the project. That's it.
Correct.
So you can't put something in a setback, you can't take too much impervious space. It still needs to be all the zoning requirements. Just means
All other
you need a special
requirements.
permit.
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
It's a lower level of scrutiny, and also a special permit involves a public hearing for the public to, and so that wouldn't be involved with the site plan
And
review.
the other thing I should state, Mr. Chairman, is that when you have site plan review, a by right site plan review, the only reason that a board can deny an application for a by right review, site plan review, is if there's a health or safety issue that comes forward and identified by the board, and you could deny that or have some conditions on that. But if it meets all the requirements of the zoning ordinance, all provisions,
Yeah.
and it's labeled as by right, then you have to approve the site.
And reasonable conditions can be worked out with the developer as we do.
Correct.
But it's lower level of scrutiny than special permit. And you're not getting official public input. And I just want to mention too, we have a couple of input, as I mentioned, by email, though at least one person is here. They may want to do it directly. And we also got some input from, which I'll offer later, from planning board member Jeff Sauser, who couldn't be here, but had a lot of thoughts about these. So I can offer those later. But one start with those of us who are here. So, you have any thoughts or questions that people have about this?
No, I think during the deliberation, I'll have a couple of questions. So I guess we should ask the public. I don't have anything right now.
Eric, I wanted to ask you, what characteristics does the semi-residential district have, and like what distinguishes that district from other districts in Greenfield?
Semi-residential district is located right next to the central commercial district. So it's kind of a mixed use district. It has some retail and other commercial operations there as well as residential. The central commercial is really for commercial and business entities, and the residential districts R, A, B, and C is really for high residential to low density residential development.
Here's an example of a street that falls into that.
Let's see.
Yes.
Franklin Street.
Right.
Yeah.
Doesn't it go from
Church Street, Franklin Street, that
Union
is,
Street.
yes, Union Street, that whole area there.
Union is seems to me as a very residential street.
There's also a small portion, as we recently talked about, near
Near
Arch.
Near Arch Street, north of Arch Street.
Just going back to the bigger picture. So just to clarify, does the planning board have the sole authority to make these zoning amendments?
No, glad you asked. So we don't have authority to change the zoning ordinance at all.
Okay,
But we can, as we're talking about with the cluster development, we can initiate. There were 5 entities that can initiate, and we're one of them.
I see.
And so, so it'd be basically us coming to, we would initiate, and it's the same process that would happen with the cluster development. So then it goes to a public hearing, joint public hearing with the Economic Development Committee of the council. And then this board and that committee would make recommendations to the council, and then the council decides. It's the
I see.
council is the decision maker on zoning issues.
Yes, yeah.
We do have a hand up, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if you want to recognize Susan Wargapti.
Sure. Peter, let me just say, thank you, Susan. I'll be with you in a sec. Peter, did you have anything you wanted to bring up first about this?
Not at the moment, no.
Thank you. Yeah, Susan.
On behalf of myself personally and Housing Greenfield, I'd just like to point out that Greenfield, our estimate is that we need somewhere between 600 and 1,000 units in Greenfield to support the population that we presently have here. We have a lot of folks doubled up. We have a lot of young people that are couch surfing. And also, of course, we have folks who are living outside right now. And this gives us an opportunity, this kind of zoning gives us an opportunity to be able to meet the needs of the population we have here. And without changing the character of the neighborhoods very much at all. I mean, if we're looking at, at the streets that you were talking about, we're talking about residential units in a residential area. We're not talking about, building a factory in the middle of some of these areas. So we would very much like to see this. It would move the process along, and we could get developers in to be able to do some infill housing, for instance, or to do other kinds of housing that would be helpful to having us actually be able to have most of the people in our community housed properly. I thank you.
Thank you, Susan. And this is an informal process. It's not a public hearing, but if you could just give roughly where you're from as well, just so we can.
Sure. I'm Susan Wargaptic. I live at 45 Forest Avenue in Greenfield, and I also represent Housing Greenfield.
Thank you so much. Any other, John, did you want to, could you?
I'm happy to.
Yeah, please.
You want me to just project, basically? No,
Again?
just project. Okay.
Or you can come up here if you want. It's helpful. Just to be heard on the mic. I don't know how well.
I'll
record. Thank you.
migrate myself so I don't have to shout. Okay. So Susan said it better than I could, but I was really hoping to see these things pass in for a couple of different reasons. Economic reasons, environmental reasons. This is a city that I moved to 6 years ago, almost at this point, because I could afford to live here. And I am incredibly, incredibly grateful for that. And there's a direct connection between the number of housing units in a community and the demand for housing and the price. And so we have a community that clearly has a lot of demand, which is wonderful, that people want to move here. And the goal of making these kinds of changes is to ensure that there are others who want to make Greenfield their future who will be allowed to do so. And so that's kind of the basic idea behind here. You increase supply, you have demand that's obviously, like I said, hot and happening, and you hopefully can make it so we're a little bit more affordable as a community. As Susan said, I can kind of just go through each of them. The multifamily by right and semi-residential zones, that's downtown adjacent. Multifamily units there make a ton of sense, not just for economic reasons, but also for walkability and environmental reasons. If we want a community that's going to be sustainable in the future, the federal government just came out saying we need to have a less car-centric lifestyle, just like a couple days ago. We've known this for years. We need to make it so people can walk into their community. One of the best things about Greenfield is that ability. So that, I think, should be a no-brainer, I hope. The maximum number of units in new multifamily dwellings. I have this, when I think about this stuff, I think about the way the downtown is constructed already. We have big brick 4-story buildings, and we should make those legal to build again. And so allowing multiple units or additional units in multifamily dwellings could allow us to make downtown apartment blocks, for example. Amending zoning to allow first floor dwelling units in mixed use areas. That would be especially a boon to those who have mobility issues. If you can't find a building with an elevator or whatever it might be, opening up units to our elderly population or those, again, with mobility issues would be huge. I spoke with Director Tuareg about these areas, and one of the things he mentions is you could have a back door on, a back entrance on a commercial building and still have a commercial building on the front. So there's some fears I know of eating up commercial real estate, but I think we can do both, walk and chew gum. The row house idea, again, we had just recently legalized triplexes being side by side. That was one of the first votes that I took while I was on city council. And this is kind of an extension of that idea. Space geometry is kind of what we're constrained by if we don't want to sprawl into the meadows, which I am certain this board does not want to, and I don't want to see either. So we need to build denser. ADUs by rights, I had a number of emails. Honestly, the only thing that people emailed me about, aside from the first floor dwelling units, was the ADU issue, and they were universally positive, except with one exception. I could go on about this for a while, but the ADU piece, if you have somebody who's got a developmental disability who has to be caretaken by their parents, this would allow them to continue to live on property owned by that family. And that could be huge. You could be somebody aging in place. Maybe you turn your garage into an ADU and your kids rent the house from you that they grew up in. There's the number of ways this can make people's lives easier, I think, is really worth considering. And so I would love to see all of these happen. And I appreciate you guys taking them up. So.
And I'll just respond, you're obviously proposing these as a package with a theme of increasing housing and accessibility. We're obviously needing to take them from the point of view of vote and an initiative one at a time, as will the council,
Of course.
vote there. But I appreciate that there's a broader theme. Well, John is sitting up here to.
Did you do any research looking at other communities and their zoning laws with regards to lot sizes and things like that in different districts?
Not lot sizes specifically, the general sort of principle of, more housing equaling less cost of it is kind of what I was focused on. I've done a lot of reading around this area, and it's something I'd certainly be interested in. I was out in Seattle, probably 2 weeks ago, and they had a graph in their newspaper, just showing like, hey, look, homelessness is on the rise, and you have another chart showing the price of housing on the rise. And so that's the part that really
It's a supply and demand issue.
It's totally
right on the head.
100%, 100%. So I'm
But
sure.
You mentioned the meadows.
Yep.
And one of the things I was thinking, what we kind of talked about last meeting was, lot sizes again, we've got a 40,000 square foot requirement. What if we were to drop it down to 15,000 square feet or something like that? Did you look at things like that?
So one of the things, I grew up in Hatfield, which is a community that is very rural. And one of the things that I saw happening as a young person, my first job was working on a tobacco farm, was seeing those farm fields taken up by subdivisions, because the price of land is high and a farmer, instead of farming, ends up being in a position. So I worry a little bit about that in areas like the Meadows. Grant you, there is the suburban residential district. That area, if you subdivided a giant lawn of somebody's house out there, I think that's a great way to meet some demand. I would really hate to see farm fields being taken up by housing. So that's like my biggest concern, I guess, with that kind of thing.
You say taken up by housing, I mean, if it's a usable piece of land for housing.
Right.
And we should definitely, we should use it. But my question again was, if we were looking at making the lot smaller, it makes the house a little less expensive. You buy less land, you get more houses in a lot. You didn't look at that. You didn't consider that as well.
To be perfectly honest, I mean, with I've been on the city council for 8 months. And so this is me trying to get the conversation started. By no means do I think this is going to solve the housing crisis. Nor is it the only thing that we should look at. So honestly, I appreciate you asking the question, just as another thing to think about.
It just seems like you don't need 40,000 square feet for a house.
What was that?
You don't need a 40,000 square foot lot to put a house.
No, you don't.
So you have to be reasonable,
Yeah.
15, even 12,000 is a size lot.
Right. It's the same principle as all of these ideas.
Yep. Great. Thank you.
I want to acknowledge, I see a couple of hands. I'm going to get to you shortly, Stephanie, and then Susan. I want to check if someone who hadn't spoken wanted to weigh in before coming back to you. Thank you. While John is up here, do other board members have questions for him or?
I guess I had some questions and some of you answered some of these already. So, for raising the maximum number of units allowed in new multifamily dwellings, did you have how did you decide the change?
The specific number of
The specific number of units.
Director Corrigan and I sat down.
Okay.
And I determined that number. Yeah, no, that was not.
Okay.
I trust his excellency.
Yeah. So is that based on like Montague, Northampton, East Hampton?
I would have to defer to Director Tuareg because again,
Basically a starting point to start the conversation.
Okay.
I picked a reasonable number, what I thought was reasonable, because right now there's a limit of 24 per building. And I imagine they did that so that there wouldn't be massive high-rise buildings, apartment buildings. But this is a new world. Housing is a great need. So I just increased the number per building to some number that would start the conversation.
Okay. Yeah, I'm curious, what other apartment buildings that exist in Greenfield, how many units they would have, that one on Congress Street.
Right.
I know the Weldon is kind of a special case because it used to be a hotel, but how many units are there? I know I lived in a apartment building that had 8 apartments in it. It was, I think the current cutoff is 6 or something for one entrance.
Correct.
So that was built before zoning existed, but it's a perfectly great building.
Right.
So I guess if we discuss this further, study this issue further, I think it would be great to have a little bit more numbers just to put everything in context.
And I'll offer too that we have it on the agenda as a deliberation and vote. That's only to give us, by putting it on the agenda, we have the possibility of doing that.
Yeah, totally.
We're not required to.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, just some food for thought, I guess.
No, it's a great question.
And then my main question for about the first floor dwellings and mixed use lots, my main question was what the rationale would be for a developer to build a building and have it be mixed use, but have housing on the first floor. But you kind of addressed that with front and back.
I think there's, retail is a tough industry right now. In particular, commercial spaces, as everyone knows, are not easy to fill, unfortunately. And so huge space that would have been, you take a place like Wilson's, right? Tons and tons of floor space for retail. That's unfortunately not a model that's going to work in our downtown. But a smaller restaurant, some sort of, basically services that provide entertainment or an activity seem to be what can be successful, and they probably need less space. And so I think that's a piece of it too. That makes sense. Just giving them the option. Yeah.
Yeah.
Please.
For row houses, it seems to me that row houses, I guess, also known as townhouses.
Townhouses.
Oh, so we're referring to them as townhouses?
Or row house,
Okay.
yeah, there's both.
Sorry, I wasn't sure because.
Whatever sells better.
It was listed as row houses on the agenda, but then the materials we got were titled townhouses. I guess townhouses is something that seems more familiar because that's what the more modern name. And then row houses it brings to mind like
Baltimore.
Factory, like really old housing, really, really old housing.
Sure.
So I guess I was just wondering, like, would people want to build this type of housing when they could build like a 3-family unit much more easily, seemingly?
I am not a developer.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I say we give them a shot to try it. And there are areas where it'd be really appropriate, especially in the downtown core. You extend off a building, something that shares a wall. And again, take up some of those impermeable surfaces.
And I'll just say that really does speak to the purpose of zoning. Because zoning is meant to protect the values of the community and various considerations, but also meant to allow, to what extent is reasonable, opportunities for the market, so to speak, as long as it's within certain guidelines.
Right. So, great questions, though.
Did you have more?
That was it for now.
Okay. And Peter, do you have any? No? Okay.
I had a question as to it's not included in any of the proposed amendments, but the height restrictions, was there any consideration given to the height of structures?
Yes, we talked about that, and it's frankly doing all 5 of these was enough for now, but it's definitely something that we should revisit, especially considering, the goal to have more units. And there are other things we should talk about too, but I don't want to take over your meeting.
Sure. I appreciate all the comments and work put into this. I just figure there's only so much available real estate, so going up at some point will become necessary.
Yeah. It's a matter of geometry, is what I tell my friends when I talk about it. And then they tell me to stop talking about it. And since I'm up here, I just want to thank Director Tuareg for all the work he did. He's the one that came up with the numbers. We sat down. It was a great conversation. And I really appreciate the professionalism and expertise that he brought to the table. So this is very much not my ideas. These are ideas that other people have thought of. And I am just hoping that we get to talk about them and implement them.
And Peter, thank you. John, did you have any more for Councilor Garrett at the moment, or?
No, thank you very much.
All right, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
And so we've obviously been kind of ranging amongst these 5 things. So I don't want to, if people want to chime in, I don't want to restrict you to taking it one at a time. So if you want to speak to any or all of them, please do. And Stephanie, thank you for your patience. Then I'll get to Joanna. And then I'm going to scan the room to see if there's anyone else who's before you. So thank you all for your patience. Stephanie, please.
Thank you for allowing public to speak tonight. My name is Stephanie Duclos, 166 Chapman Street. I abut the proposed district changes. I do have a clarifying question. So if we make everything by right and we eliminate the special permit process, and there's no allowances for public hearings on site approval plans, when would be the opportunity for the affected public to weigh in on the proposals if it's all allowed by right? And that's pretty much what I wanted to say.
And when you say everything by, what there are certain things you're talking about, both like the multifamily dwellings and the ADUs?
Yeah, I mean, I see the road we're going down with all of the by right changes. It's
Yeah,
eliminating the process of allowing the public to weigh in.
yeah,
There's reasons why things go to a special permit process, and we also, get to capture some money when we have to go to the special permit process as well, because there's generally appeals always involved.
yeah,
Um, and we get to put in some conditions like, some of these areas have no off-street parking requirements. So are we going to intensify the housing, but provide nowhere or locations for them to, have their cars? And then we waive that because it's, then it becomes a by right, and um,
yeah.
certain allowances are given that might be of concern, especially if you have developers that are coming in from out of town, or newly new to Greenfield, or don't necessarily know the history of the location that they're actually doing a development in. There's a lot of reasons why we have a lot of committees, and thanks for letting me speak again.
Yeah, no, and I'll offer a response, Stephanie. Um, as you said, with the special permit allows additional protections or opportunities for redress if you're not happy with the decision. As far as speaking, and there's a couple of things. As far as speaking, obviously, a public hearing gives everyone a right to speak, but it doesn't mean you're forbidden to speak if it's at a site plan review. And obviously, the chair, as I'm doing tonight, can give opportunity to give input. But the other factor is knowing about what's being proposed, because if there is a special permit, abutters are by law notified. That's part of the ordinance. And if there's a site plan review, it could be right next door. And if you're not being scrupulous, checking agendas and stuff like that, or public notices, you wouldn't necessarily know about it. Um, so that's another factor I think I'm aware of, that the public notification of people who might be directly affected by something. So just, I don't have an answer or a solution to that. I'm just aware of it. Any
Thank you.
others? Yep. Joanna, you wanted to comment?
Thank you for letting me speak. Joanna Whitney, 112 Franklin Street. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. I just want to comment that an important piece about talking about increasing housing stock in Greenfield very much impacts disability justice issues, that a lot of our housing stock, for numerous reasons, including age and size, kind of skate under the ADA requirements. And so for people who need to have accessible housing, who want to be in neighborhoods and, in feeling like they're a part of the community that they live in and not set off in some distant corner, there's very little options because there's very little new housing housing that's been built since the ADA was enforced 34 years ago, or written into law 34 years ago. So having conversations about housing across the board, whether it's multiple units or whether it's ADUs, I think it's really important to have that in mind as part of the conversation, because it's a need that, especially as people age, the longer you live, the higher your chances are of acquiring a disability. But certainly you can acquire a disability at any age. And so really thinking about, as we move forward, trying to solve the housing challenges that Greenfield faces, that we keep that firmly entwined in the conversation. If we don't do a good job of it now, we're looking at generations, because that's how long a building tends to last, of, you know, people not having fewer options because we didn't think about them. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Before I go back to Susan for a second time, is there anyone here who, and I noticed, Norma, you had sent something in, you could speak to it yourself, or we could read it, whichever you prefer.
Whatever you call on me, George.
Okay, very
I will
good.
speak.
And Mayor Sorg, I saw your hand up. Did you want
Yes.
to?
So you, well,
If you want to come up here, just so you make sure you'll be heard by people. Thank you. That chair's okay.
So first, I just wanted to say thank you to Councilor Garrett for taking the time to bring a lot of these things forward, and Eric also for working with him on it. I echo a lot of the things that have already been said tonight. We cannot build housing fast enough. And I applaud the efforts that this board is making to just begin to look at some of these issues. I had a visit down at Elm Terrace today, and the folks there, that was their number one issue, was housing, and many of them talked about housing and accessibility. And I am, happy with many of the things that are coming forward on this. And I also think what Pete MacGyver brought up about going up is an important thing to consider. That is the most economical way to build housing, is on top of each other. So I'm hoping at some juncture that you will bring that forward. And that's all I had to say. I support them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Norman. No. Well, thank you.
Mitch Spade, Chestnut Hill. What I've heard tonight, I think you need to give this some serious thought. First of all, in the plan, the scheme of things, you need to address legal structure. I didn't hear anyone in this room talk about legal structure. You're talking strictly landlord-tenant relationships. That's dangerous. Most of what you're proposing will attract absentee landlords, okay? Legal structure, just in case you don't know what it is, I'll let you know what it is. Okay, fee simple. There's also condos, co-ops, okay? You create stakeholders in that equation. Right now, what you're proposing, ADU, you are aware, George, this came up about 10 years ago. And you know my stance on that. Okay, I want my neighbor to have the same metes and bounds that I have. Now, prior to this young lady got up and spoke about going green, open spaces. I'm all for that. How can we be talking about open spaces and at the same time you're encouraging high density? Doesn't work. Also, you're talking about addressing downtown commercial space and so on and so forth. There's many towns the size of Greenfield who are doing very well. They're not waiting for malls to come in. They have independent shop owners. When we get back to what we're talking about here, I'd like to know, maybe you have the answers, because I can only surmise and assume from what Susan Wojcicki has presented. What's fueling this? When I look at the real estate transactions and so forth, most of these people are taking advantage of an opportunity to become a first-time homeowner, or either taking real resources and coming here to Greenfield and buying outright cash. We need to be creating a path to home ownership, not landlord-tenant. We have that already. We know where that model leads to. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
My turn?
No, sorry.
I'm sorry, I wasn't sure what you said.
No, appreciate your patience, Susan.
Okay. Oh, good evening. My name is Joan Marie Jackson, 2 Chestnut Hill in Greenfield, Massachusetts. I agree with what Mitchell Spate just said, and I have just a few more things to add to it. As you're aware, Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey just recently signed and passed a historical new law of which abolishes the unconstitutional practice known as home equity theft. And this is a big win for real property owners, for homeowners to feel more secure with making Greenfield a choice to invest and pay taxes and help build the city to be better. According to the Daily Hampshire Gazette, I was surprised that it was reported that the mayor of our city had no comment on this legislation. This is an important legislation, and I think the constituents of Greenfield would like to know where the mayor stands on this topic. You know, as real property owners, as taxpayers moving forward, who have invested equity in the city. And it makes a path for generational wealth, you know, with home ownership, paying taxes, passing down property to children, grandchildren. Before they couldn't do that. Everything was taken away. Mitchell and I and Al Norman, Senator Comerford, many others across the United States did teamwork. How it happened, only the universe can align that. But it worked, and it passed a law to protect home ownership. That has standing here in the city of Greenfield, and we should protect it. We really should, and build on that. So I appreciate your time. I'm hoping that constituents have a better clarity on how our leadership feels about these things and moving forward, because this is hard work and important steps. It may not affect us right now, but generations from now, it will help Greenfield to be a better place to live and to invest in. So I'm grateful for all who listened on the Zoom, who are here and who live here and who would love to live here and own a home. Thank you.
Thank you. Snow.
Good evening, members of the planning board. My name is Al Norman, Grinnell Street in Greenfield. I want to make a few comments in general and talk about a little bit about an issue that many of you may know I care about, which is the detached accessory dwelling unit issue. As you know, Greenfield has, since 2020, has had a special permit requirement, as does the town of Montague and many other communities across Massachusetts and the nation, frankly. A recent study by Harvard said that the politically controversial decision to make ADUs by right is controversial because right now it's by special permit. And the only reason I care about special permit is that's the only way that neighbors can talk to each other about what's happening with a detached unit, which may be placed very close to their property. We had a very controversial detached ADU that was placed right on the edge of another person's property. That other person, because they had a special permit, was able to sue. And that project did not happen. The project was not located in the right place. The only way the neighbor was able to comment was through a special permit. So I regret, it appears, and I have not read the 181-page bill that just was signed yesterday by the governor of the Affordable Housing Act. It includes apparently a section that makes ADUs by right in all zones, which is completely nonsense. I'm hoping that Greenfield won't put ADUs in industrial zones. I'm hoping that we won't put them in commercial zones. It's a form of residential housing, and it should be in residential units. I also would suggest that I don't think that these units, detached ADUs, should be located in neighborhoods like the one I live in. I live on 2/10 of an acre. I've got no place to put an ADU except right hard on the boundary of my property. I think at least a half an acre parcel should be needed. One of the things we don't really appreciate in Greenfield is the historic nature of some of our neighborhoods that have been around. My home was built in the 1880s. I've had people from other towns call me and ask me to keep an eye out for houses in my neighborhood that they want to move to. People from Amherst and other places, they want to move to Greenfield to live in a single family neighborhood. And now we're talking about possibly having landlords buy houses like mine, convert them into two-family, and then put a third unit in the backyard and make a very nice profit. But let me tell you the problem with that. There's a number of problems with that. I'm gonna leave a little statement with the board beyond what I sent you, George and Eric. But this is a picture of an ADU, you could call it. It's on Prospect Street in 2 minutes from my house. This was built in 2022. This unit, it's on its own parcel, so it's not an ADU, but it's a small, you call it a tiny home, small home. This parcel on Prospect Street has a total of finished building area of 885 feet. So it's just shy of a 900-foot limit on an ADU. And the building is valued by the city of Greenfield at $183,600. Now, the people that I know that need help with housing and own a home, they are not going to build a $183,000 house. It's just beyond the reach of most people. And we're overblowing what ADUs can do to solve our housing problem. And I'll get into that in a second. But I want to try to be quick here. I don't know really what you're talking about tonight because I haven't seen it. It's not published anywhere online. The only way I could see it would be to contact the director of planning and ask him to give me a copy, which he always does. Eric is great about that. But to the general public who doesn't understand how this works, they go to the meeting of the planning board and they see an agenda and it's all listed, but I can't click on any of those items to see what the items are. So I would just urge you in the future, help us understand, if you want to engage the public in what you're doing and get them to come to hearings and care about what's happening in this town, we have to be more transparent. We have to put these proposals out there. I can't tell you what when Eric's talked about the number of units per building. On multifamily, I am concerned. I live in a neighborhood that has a number of multifamily units, including the high rise. Now, I always tell people, oh, well, the high rise was built before zoning. Because how on earth would we ever have a 10-story building located in a single family district? It's absurd. The people that live there are great. I have a number of elderly people, friends who live there. But really, it made no sense at the time, and it still makes no sense to build a building that tall in a neighborhood. But we also have several multifamily units. The house next door to me is now a halfway house. There's 3 of them within two blocks of where I live now. The Victorian houses are being bought up by agencies that want to convert them into public housing for people with whatever else, behavioral health problems, with other addiction problems. All of that is very reasonable. The question is how much you do. Like a mayor once said to me, it's not how big you go, it's how you go big. So the issue here is I am concerned about multifamily, how many units we're talking about. Eric has a formula that he came up with. I haven't seen it, so I can't comment on that. Row housing, I know what it's like for people who are living in Turner's in row housing. It was built for factory workers of the paper mills. And I've had people tell me they don't like living there because you hear everything that goes on in your neighbor's unit. I mean, there are drawbacks in terms of loss of privacy with things like row houses. So I'm concerned about that as well. Row houses in a downtown commercial district might be reasonable. In a rural residential or SR zone, maybe it's not. And the thing that we're not doing is thinking about how do we protect the single family neighborhood that's a sort of a historic district. Well, we don't call it a historic district in Greenfield. The street that you live on, George, the street I live on, has beautiful homes that date back over 100 years. That's something worth protecting and not seeing subdivided by landlords from Tennessee into a 3-unit development. So just to conclude here, I think that we need to carefully think about this and research the cost to the town and city in terms of water, sewer, and schools. The idea of us absorbing 600 new units quickly is just, to my mind, by definition, bad planning. We cannot absorb that many units. We shouldn't be absorbing that many units. Because we're the county seat, we're getting people coming to live here who were sent here truly by the government. The people like the folks who have to live in a motel because they were immigrants from Haiti, or people who are here because of drug addiction reasons. Greenfield is bearing the brunt of all of that weight of having to deal with a general population that hasn't increased since 1950. So I think that George, I'm going to leave these with you. I put together some documents, some quick research about why ADUs don't solve the nation's housing crisis. If one person, not every member of the board could get one, I'd like it. But let me read these 3 quotes. Allowing accessory dwelling units can also increase the rental supply in neighborhoods dominated by single-family housing. Most homeowners building ADUs intended the units for rental, but despite the regulatory change, the Center for Community Innovation noted that financing, lack of awareness, and lack of interest remain barriers to ADU construction. Most ADUs are generally built mostly in affluent communities, and to the extent that we tout ADUs as a solution for building wealth and equity, it's not accomplishing that goal, as well as the policymakers would have liked to see. We can't, most low and medium income homeowners who can't afford to build an ADU and or don't have the knowledge to navigate the complicated design and permitting process are either priced out of the building, or sometimes decide to sell their home in the face of changing neighborhood demographics and hard to ignore cash offers. As I told you at the beginning, I'm being offered money to sell my house by outside developers from far away, Midwest, Kansas, Ohio, sending me letters saying, if you're interested in selling your house, contact me. I know what's happening. These homes are being snapped up. There's an article that in here about private equity firms that are buying up houses all across America. Places like BlackRock, companies like BlackRock and others, they're buying these houses. I don't think you're going to like what happens to Greenfield if some of this isn't carefully thought out. So it makes me very nervous. I hope if you take a vote on this tonight, I hope you'll vote just to put it onto a public hearing and not to approve it, because I think this needs a whole lot more research, frankly. I had a really nice conversation with Councilman Garrett about this, and I think he's a very thoughtful person. I think this needs a lot of discussion, and it makes me very concerned. So thank you for more time than I probably should have had.
Thank you. So these are just copies.
Those are just copies for you, yeah.
Thank you. And just a couple of things, just to let you know.
Yeah.
The email you sent to Eric and myself was disseminated to the whole board.
Thank you, George.
And any vote we would take would simply be, we don't approve anything, as I said before, it would just simply be to initiate a public hearing. So clear on that.
I think that's important. A public hearing is where this needs to go next. And let's listen to what the people of Greenfield want. I have to say. Thank you all for your patience.
That's all. And Susan, your hand must be getting tired from holding it up so long.
Well, it's electronic, so it's not a big deal. First of all, I thought I was just speaking to the first thing. So that's why I wanted to come back in. And
Please.
since then, a number of things. And speaking to a number of the concerns that are brought up that I think are really important. I think we do have to think about this carefully. That doesn't mean that we don't need 600 units of housing, and we don't need them. I would love to have them today in a thoughtful manner, but I think we need to think about it. That includes home ownership. It includes affordable home ownership. It includes market rate housing. It includes housing that is rental. It includes co-ops. It includes all kinds of housing. We have a co-op. We have 2 co-ops in town who are very interested in developing housing. One of them is actively working on that right now. We have there are lots of options here. It is not a case of it has to be rental or it has to be this. That's the first thing I wanted to say. We've got right now. There's the Regional Development Inc. is redeveloping a house on Cleveland Street that has been vacant for 10 years. It is going to be an affordable housing unit. Okay, 1 single family home ownership. Right now, there is a house being built on Petty Plain Road by Habitat. Single family home ownership, affordable housing. So there are options here that we need to think about. And my concern is that we have a zoning system that allows us to do that and allows us to have the options that the people in our community need. In terms of open space and high density, there is no reason why we can't preserve the open space around high density areas. The high density, we need to have a walkable community. We need to have if we want to cut the number of cars, the best way to do that is to have a good public transportation system, which, by the way, is now or soon will be free based on the state's budget this year. It needs to be better, a lot better, and have housing that is close to stores and close to other things that people need. In terms of the first floor issue, if we have buildings that are not going to be used for commercial purposes, but can be converted, and I think there are questions. For instance, many storefronts don't have side windows. They don't have areas where they have the proper circulation for someone to live there. I think all of those things have to be looked at. But we should be able on Main Street, if we have storefronts that cannot be used, that no one's interested in using them for commercial purposes. We ought to look at ways that people can have those as housing units. And those are one of the things in thinking about what Joanna's been talking about, the ability to be able to develop accessible units. One of the big problems we have is many of our big buildings are very old. They're very difficult to make accessible because elevators cost a ton of money. Are there other alternatives we have to making them fully accessible? There are options. I think we need to look at those. I think that needs to be part of how we plan. I'm really hoping that Jeff's report on housing is going to talk about these issues. On terms of the ADUs, we can make rulings that the ownership of the house and the ownership of the ADU have to be the same. Does this mean that the people who are calling me, as well as calling Al and saying, hey, do you want to sell your house? That we will rule them out entirely? No. What it does mean is we have more possibilities of the homeowner, of the larger property and the ADU being the same. And therefore, this being more of a 3-family unit than being a rental unit from someone from Idaho. But I think we need to think about that. I seriously do, but I don't think we can rule out the possibility of ADUs, entirely, because I think that they are one part of the picture. I don't think they're a big part of the picture, very honestly, but I think they are one part. And I know of people who in town who have children who are becoming adults who are autistic, who would really like to be able to have a building that is part of their property where their child could live independently, but where they would be also able to be available to their child who may need supports of various kinds. So we've got to figure out how we make our rules in such a way that we don't rule it out, but we don't make it, make it so such a wide-ranging thing that we end up with the kinds of things that Al's talking about. Those are not outrageous, but I don't think that we have to be one end of the spectrum or the other. Let's see, what else? Yesterday, I have not read it all yet. I've read pieces of it. A 5.2 billion 5-year housing bond bill came through. That for affordable housing, that includes home ownership. It includes, I haven't checked the sections about ADUs yet to see what it says. Includes improving the housing that the GHA provides, includes making a wide variety of housing available within the affordability range. And just so you understand, we have firefighters who are eligible for affordable housing in this town. We have teachers that are eligible for affordable housing in this town. We are not necessarily talking about housing that only supports the poorest of the poor. Many of the people within our community are eligible for affordability, for some level of subsidy that will allow them to either own or rent housing that they would like to live in. And so we need to look at that broad spectrum and understand that we are talking about making housing available to the people who live here and work here. And that we can do that all, and we have options if we are ready to move on things. We have options to be able to make that housing available to our community. So I am hoping that we can all work together to come up with a plan, and it may be several small plans and not one big plan, but that approaches all of these issues so that we can have the kind of housing we need. By the way, I have a list right now of over 100 vacant lots in Greenfield. And I got this from the assessor's office. So we have options of doing infill housing. We have a number of ways to be able to start looking at housing and making it possible for people to be able to live there. And with that, I'll close. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm gonna read an email we got of input. Before moving on to that, I just wanted to offer an off-topic PSA. You mentioned, Susan, about public transportation and the cost of it, and I just want to make sure anyone who's listening knows that since the start of COVID, the FRTA fixed routes buses have been free and continue to be free. Eric is the chair of the FRTA advisory board, and they have approved that through next year, I think.
Correct.
So, and that may continue in perpetuity. We don't know, but I don't know if there's additional things that would be free, but the fixed buses have been free for several years.
Just so you know, this is in the state budget that all of them will be free. All of the regionals will be free. So that it should be continuing. This comes out of the fair share amendment.
Thanks.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
One clarification for the folks. It's been referenced several times. I just want to make it clear that the existing ADU ordinance that we have now does require the homeowner to own both the unit and the ADU, the primary house and the ADU, and the homeowner has to either live in the ADU or the primary house.
Yeah.
So right now you could not condominiumize it or rent it out, both units. It's not allowed.
And that issue of changing the ownership requirement has come up in other situations before, but that's not part of this proposal.
Mr. Chairman, the governor's law signed yesterday eliminates the requirement for home ownership of an ADU. Major change. I don't know if everyone's aware of that, but that's in there. I also, George, I wanted to mention $60 million in that budget for grants and loans to people who live with a disabled or elderly person who needs assistance, including accessory dwelling units, and I'm hoping that Greenfield will be right in front of the line to get some of that money. That's what this money was supposed to be used for. That's what Susan was talking about. But the governor has unfortunately listened to people who want to just monetize ADUs into units of rental that they would simply rent out and not live anywhere near it. So what Eric said is true yesterday, but it's no longer true. And it's a great concern to us. And that's why we have to be so careful about how we not end up with simply a rental program that maximizes profits for landlords who we don't even know.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to read an email that came in from Sandy Thomas, a Greenfield resident, this morning, and this was also sent to all board members, but I'll read it since she's not here. I see the ADU issue is coming up. I urge you not to expand by right developments with many foreseeable complications down the road. Affordable housing is an issue, and it appears to be here and elsewhere. ADUs are not owner-occupied. That are not owner-occupied only opens up a plethora of predictable challenges. Although it may seem altruistic as a solution, I could imagine overcrowding within the ADU or property, resale of main house, and complications with residents of ADU. What protections would they have to stay? Decrease in property values of the main house and neighboring homes. Who is responsible for upkeep of unit and any problems that may arise? I can't imagine a by right is a workable solution, especially if it is not owner occupied. I urge you to study and address the full impact of by right structures before moving ahead. Is there anyone else who's here in person or participating remotely who had some input? Yeah, let me just check if there's anyone else who hasn't spoken up. Thank you. Seeing nobody, please.
There's a lot to discuss, and no doubt, again, there's going to be a public hearing potentially, eventually, and there will be more discussion there. But there's just one thing that keeps coming up I really want to address, which is I think an implicit idea that a renter is a less productive member of our community than a homeowner, and that is not true. So I don't know when the last time most folks in this room rented an apartment, but I was renting an apartment 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And, I don't know. There's in sales, the whole phrase, try it, you buy it. Renting is an opportunity for people to get to know a community. And God, I moved 12 times in 10 years in my 20s and my early 30s. And that's a very common experience. It's only become more common. Al, who I did have a lovely conversation with, and I just want to tell him that was true, mentioned Highland Avenue and its historic nature. It's an unaffordable neighborhood. I live on Hope Street. I walk up the hill and I watch the income ladder go up. And, there are beautiful play tennis courts on top of that hill. It would be lovely if somebody who couldn't afford a $600,000 house could walk to one of those courts and the beautiful park that's maintained by the entire city. So there are elements, yeah, absolutely, of changing the neighborhood's character, and that wouldn't be bad. And so I don't want to belabor the point too much, but I think there's a lot of fear about the danger of terrible landlords. And by the way, when I moved to Greenfield, I had a terrible landlord, which prompted me to really want to buy a house here because I love this community. And so, it's absolutely true. You're going to have somebody who's a schmuck who lives in Shutesbury, which I did. But that's no reason not to allow people the opportunity to try out a community. And that's the way I would frame that, rather than saying these are folks who aren't contributing to our community and have no investment in our community. So I don't want to belabor it, but that was just something that came to mind.
Yes.
Oh, and just one last thing. The private equity concerns, part of the reason that folks are getting phone calls is because the price of housing is incredibly inflated. Private equity has no interest in communities that are depressed. We're not, we are, but we are in a market that is a buying market, right? People want these homes so they can make a profit off of them. Berkshire Hathaway does not buy houses in communities they can't make money. By building more units, we make it so we're less vulnerable to these predators. So I share that concern, but I think the solution is a different one, which is building more housing. So, thanks.
Just space.
Yeah. Answer John's. What's this? Berkshire Hathaway is here. There's a lot that just sold on Orchard Street.
That's the whole.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah. And also, again, I think we need to be promoting opportunities that are fair to homeownership. As John said, he moved to Greenfield to become a homeowner. Let's keep that in play for other folks. I think it's important.
Thank you. Any other public input to this complex and multifaceted topic? No. And do board members have any other comments before we move on to action items? Yeah,
Remember,
please.
but
No, please.
after hearing today's comments and thoughts on this, and the mayor's here, fortunately, I think that a task force should be formed with key people from the council, the planning board, others. And we need to get together and start studying this issue long before a public hearing.
Well, I hadn't thought of a task force, but I definitely was going to offer the opinion this isn't ready to be an action item tonight, even though it's there provisionally. So,
Some type of group that could get together, subcommittee or something, a study group or whatever the name should be, but we should get together and really look at this in detail and really thoughtful. I mean, I have to be honest, the things that were on this list were pretty basic. So to actually change the ordinance was pretty easy to accomplish those things, which is a good thing, but the impacts need to be looked at. And I think we really need to get a group together and think about this in more detail before we ever schedule a public hearing.
can I ask your experience or thoughts, Eric, about how exactly a multi-representative body like that works or has worked? Or
Task force have been formed all the time in Greenfield to study a particular issue or get something passed. It happens all the time.
what's the procedure to initiate or move forward?
Office could form a task group.
What I've seen done before in the past is you take some board members, maybe a board member for planning or zoning, maybe someone from economic development or housing, and then you need citizens, I'm just thinking at the top of my head what we would do, but that was coming to mind as soon as you brought it up. It's been successful in the past. I've actually, tried to make sure even putting people on planning board that you get people with a couple of various opinions so that we wouldn't have everybody with the same thoughts, because that's actually what we've had on city council. You end up with a pretty good decision-making when you put some different people together. But I do think it's very important to have board members, people that actually have knowledge around this. I was sitting here listening myself after Victor spoke. That's a very good point about, lot size and frontage and making comparisons. That just FYI, that's on, mass.gov, and Eric, who always does a tremendous job getting all the board members' information, can make that easily accessible for board members. And I thought that you had a great point because I did not have all of the information myself. Yeah. I think and this was a talking thing. We're neighbors. We're neighbors. We all live in this community. Nobody has all the right ideas, but it is something that needs to be looked at. And, change is difficult. I was on planning board and then council, and zoning is one of the toughest issues that come up. There is a lot of, to me, every time a change comes up, there's actually a lot of fear that's associated with it, but I do think it needs to be looked at. And I think that's a fine idea. If that's what this group wants, I would do my best to put together a group, a thoughtful group. So that's up to all of you.
I love the idea of having a broader look and having broad perspectives. And I appreciate so much the various, the wisdom that's been shared this evening by folks from various vantage points. And I was just wondering partly about the mechanics of such a thing, like who decides who's on or representing what groups. It obviously has to be a public entity that, has public meetings and, so I just wasn't sure how that stuff works, the details. So
So
I don't know if we have to solve it here,
I
but
think that usually is within the purview of the mayor. We did the opioid settlement. I just put a task force together with that. There are a couple of city councilors, some from economic development, people have had experience with that, and then we have people from different social service organizations, people had been touched by the opioid problem, and I think a good group got put together. Had my word, I would try my best to do that, if that is your choice.
Yeah.
I'll be back in 1 minute.
Sure. So, since we're flowing with this and we're not, it looks like going to consider it as an action item, to vote on, unless I'm hearing something different from anybody. But, what do board members think of this suggestion of having kind of a task force the mayor would put together on which this board would be represented to look at these aspects and other housing, zoning related housing issues. Any thoughts?
We need to have a deadline.
Mm-hmm.
I see it being another way to drag on something over and forever and ever. And I don't want to see that. I think if everyone's talking affordable housing and need for housing, it needs to be addressed sooner than later. I think there's been topics brought out this evening which are well beyond our ability to control. We can't tell someone not to buy a house. I don't care who it is. You can't tell them not to buy a house. So if someone wants to sell their house, it's sold. That's the end of that. I don't think, so the task force, I think we need to have a deadline. We need to be like Thanksgiving, Christmas, you're done, you've done your work, you deliberate, you come back and we're done. It just can't be an ongoing task force.
I know I have mixed feelings in some ways. I get the importance of having kind of a holistic vision and addressing it in various ways. But I also know that as I was saying before, you kind of taking these things one at a time and you're, passing and in some ways moving things forward is important. And I would hate to see it be too broad, so it's not getting to some changes quickly. So that would be my only concern. I could see it's more. Yeah, it's been a lovely discussion tonight. It brings up a lot of different, like I say, perspectives and issues, but I also want to focus on what can we get done to make changes with due consideration of the benefits and the potential negative impacts, as people are all talking about. I'm a bit mixed.
Just 2 cents. I agree with the mayor. Change is sometimes difficult. And fortunately, anything we do, we can undo. So if we make a decision on the council or the board, so we're going to try the zoning and we see something happening that we don't like, we go back and we change it. But to not act on it for fear of what might happen, it's just a dead end. A dead end.
Sarah, Peter, your thoughts?
I'm open to a task force. I think that could be a good idea. I was also going to say, since there seems to be a lot of, we've received a lot of comments particular to the ADU issue, we could break that off and table that and look at the other items separately. I would be open to that. And I agree with Victor that we really should decide a deadline for the task force if we do go that route.
Peter?
I share both the same concerns of dragging the process on, and Sarah brings a great point that if the ADU seems to be the most controversial piece, we could break that off and come up with a plan. But I'm happy to entertain whatever the board decides.
I mean, my sense, and I'm always open to being corrected, but was that the board would prefer not to uh, treat this as an action item tonight on any of these five. But I guess I'll throw out there too that you always could, and I appreciate the distinction of the ADU being a triggering kind of issue for a lot of folks. And some people argue it's not a real effective solution. And I could see potentially moving forward with the other four as action items in the near future, in parallel with a task force doing broader or maybe offering input into that consideration, but not just saying, oh, let's see what the task force comes up with. Because a lot of these things, there's good ideas about lot size, and, things like that, aren't going to happen all as a big package. They're going to be one thing after another. You want them to have some degree of integration. And so they all make sense. But I think these are all moving toward increasing opportunities for more housing. So that would be I suggest, not tonight, but moving forward with the other four, potentially have them on the agenda, whether it's in September, October, and seeing what happens with the task force in the interim. That would be, I don't know if that seems reasonable.
That sounds reasonable.
Any objection to that, Peter? Or?
No, that seems fine.
Sarah?
Mr.
I
Chairman?
thought you were nodding. Yeah.
Two questions. Well, first, the townhouses. Haven't done that much. There's not enough to move forward with the townhouses yet. This is just the information I gave you to start a discussion, which really didn't get into as much as I wanted to about townhousing. There's different options. Right now, there is a development, I think it's in Shelburne. I can't remember the town, but their regulations do not specifically call for townhouses, but they were able to do it under their regulations. So they built a 7 or 8 unit in a row, but it's really multifamily, but it's almost like a townhouse situation. So they were able to do it. What I gave for the information for the board tonight is just some thoughts about what other communities have done, potential definitions, and the main issue is, right now our regulations do allow someone to build something that is very similar to townhouses, but it wouldn't be at the lot line and creating individual lots. It would be a condominium open space situation. So it can happen, but it's not individual lots. So I didn't get into that of the regulations to amend the ordinance to be that specific at this point. It's just a discussion for you all to consider. How do you want townhouses? Do you want townhouses in the city? Where do you want them? And how would you allow them when currently our regulations would allow a de facto type of townhouse situation, but it would be condominium and it wouldn't be individual lots, homeownership.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Eric. And even though this was on there for deliberation and voting, I never thought we were going to get to that.
Yeah.
Because it's such a rich topic, wanted to hear a lot of input, and also, like you said, we need to do some more research to get our perspective on it. I mean, my thought would be to continue getting that background information, examples like you're talking about, how it might be potentially unnecessary. If what the goal would be is relatively achievable with the existing ordinance. And I know next month we're coming back to discuss the MDR, which is a very complex topic. So I was going to suggest maybe we come back to these at the following meeting, at the October meeting.
That would give me more time to do additional research.
Right. Yeah. And see what happens with the task force process. So.
And the other question I had was for the folks that did read the law that was passed by Governor Healy on the housing bill, bond bill. I'm a little confused. If I thought I heard that the governor has made it by right in all districts, ADUs, and that they can be rented out. So why are we discussing it if it's already done for every single community, unless I missed something?
What's something that's breaking news?
It's breaking news, but if it's true.
We need to look at exactly how it's written. I haven't seen the language yet. It's a big bill, and so I hadn't gotten there yet, but others may have seen it and looked at it. I think we need to look at the language.
Okay, yeah, well, I'll look at that because it's possible that communities need to do something, either that or they don't, and it's automatically in play. Right. We have to find that out.
So that could be moot because gotcha. Okay. Okay, board comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Status of things? Okay, very good. Moving on to action items.
Close the public meeting.
Well, it's not really, it's totally an informal opportunity for people to weigh in.
That's fine.
No, but thank you.
Zoning.
Yeah, appreciate it. So the first one is the deliberation on vote on the DPW FY 25 Cool Corridors Grant Program application. And for any discussion people want to have before making a motion, or start with a motion?
I'm happy to make a motion. Just wait a second.
Okay.
So it seems like the correct motion would be, I would like to make a motion to approve the application, for the Cool Corridors Grant Program, and the planting plan, the application and planting plan.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Peter. Discussion.
Well, I walk here regularly, actually, in the affected area, to go to doctor's appointments, and I anticipate continuing to walk there. So just in my capacity as a member of the public, I would appreciate the shade. And as a member of the planning board, it seems like a great thing. So that's all I have to say about that.
I'll call myself. I'll offer that. Yeah, I think it's so crucial to walkability. To have shade trees, and I think too, speaking to what you were saying earlier, Victor, about the cost and where the money's coming from. Not costing the city, but it's coming out of public funding. And it was highlighted about the nature of Greenfield's status economically, and I think there is a reasonable redistribution of wealth, if you will, and that's where we have as a a collective where towns that would have trouble doing this get some help from the larger state coffers. I think it's reasonable, and I think it's important to be considerate of that and not just act like it's free money. But I think it's a reasonable use of funds, and I think it's a great opportunity, and I appreciate the work that's gone into putting this together, and including collaborating with the private property owners, which I think is so the public-private collaboration in town always is so impressive to me. So
Well, my only issue was it was private property, so I think it's a okay look. But it's private property, so I have an issue with that. So we do it somewhere where the public guys use it all the time. I wouldn't have any doubts at all, but I have an issue with that.
Point taken. Thanks. Peter, any comments, or are you ready to vote?
No, I'd be prepared for a vote. I rise.
Okay. Thank you. All board members in favor of the motion approving the application? Any board members, that's 3. Any board members against? Any board members abstaining? Thank you. Got that, Eric?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Next is planning board deliberation on and initiation of the proposed amendments to the open space / cluster development ordinance. And we obviously got the materials from Allison, and then we still had that one issue to clarify if we were going to, or if and how.
We vote on it until we get the actual corrected document. We need to wait till she corrects it and sends it back to.
No, that's just a tool for our deliberation, as long as we understand what we're voting on.
No,
that's okay.
You can say as amended.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah.
It was questioning the motion.
So we could start with a motion if someone's ready to do that.
Make a motion that we approve the amended open space cluster development program as presented to us in the August meeting.
If I may, thank you. As I may suggest, we're not actually approving it, we're initiating the process. Thank you.
Eric will correct my motion.
So we had that one issue. It sounds like we had consensus. We had wanted that addressed. So the question was going from 100% to something else. And Allison had this evening suggested 15% and Rick, you suggested 10%. So those three sections, A, B, and C, would have all 10%. We can start that with the deliberation since that's the unresolved portion. Any preference in those or any other percentage numbers? Do you have any thoughts in this, Eric? I know we hadn't had a chance to hadn't been last time, but
I can see the 10% thing, but I kind of had the initial reaction that Allison did on going from 100 to 10. I understand the intent. I mean, right now, the zoning ordinance, there's an open space requirement for every district. And let's say the RA is 40%, and that 40% cannot include wetlands or slopes greater than 15%. So the ordinance addresses it that way. And so I'm thinking of it the same way here. I don't know, it just seems like 100 to 10% is the big difference. I would support 50%. That's just my thoughts.
Thank you. Any other perspectives? I guess sometimes inherently conservative, so I would be inclined to say 50%. That had been my initial take on it too, but it's values perhaps in being bold. Sarah or Peter, preference in that regard for that figure?
Eric, can you just revisit that one more time on the existing condition requires 40%?
Per district, I'm using the urban residential as an example. So the table of dimensional requirements said every district listed, the RA requires 40% open space. And that open space means it can't be impervious surface or buildings or any covers like that. And it cannot include anything under the Wetlands Protection Act or slopes greater than 15%.
And what we had talked about here was from the point of view of supporting density of the housing development, counting, not necessarily counting as much as had been in there toward the net open space, net acreage, what's considered open space, given the habitat rationale. So I'd be inclined to go with 50%, you're at 10%, right?
That's perfect.
Sure. So we might end up with a tie.
How's it go with the other numbers on the numbers in the list? Why have one oddball out there?
Point taken.
It's simple. I don't really care, just as long as wetlands are included somehow. The fact that we left them out entirely was unfair. They should be included as part of the net open space. Another number of the committees the board is happy with.
Yeah, and I think Allison said she had missed it, but it was clear to the board.
So you want to pass on it till the next meeting, I guess.
So
We really have the time
yeah, we have
pressure.
to make a decision.
Yeah, it would be Allison's availability for the next steps.
Did Jeff have any comments on this?
Oh, thank you. Jeff had, I think it was all on the other stuff.
It was all on the other stuff.
Yeah.
Open space.
Because he was part of it.
Okay.
Yeah, and it wasn't until this afternoon I realized that hadn't been addressed. So
yeah,
that's why it's just coming up here.
Well, between 50 and 10%, I'm not quite sure how to influence the decision.
Yeah.
Fine. We'll try.
One way to do it is think of the pros and cons,
Okay, so 10% would maximize the developable space. And it would possibly make it more likely that a lot with lots of wetlands and slopes could be developed.
No, they still can't be developed. You can't develop the
Well,
wetlands of the slope.
That contains the wetlands and slope, because even if they have a smaller amount of land to build on, they could potentially build and get credit for the wetland and slope. That's the goal, right? Of 10%. 50% might be perceived as more reasonable. I mean, they're both very round numbers.
I'll add in too, I know Allison, and you could weigh in maybe too, Eric, from a broader perspective, that she was saying the areas we're talking about where this would likely apply, the wetlands wouldn't tend to be as big of an issue.
Exactly. The developable land left in the areas likely to be developed, this wouldn't come into play that often.
Right, so I'll go with 10%. I'll be persuaded by that. Because she said that's why she thought it was reasonable.
Yes, that's what she said.
Yeah.
Okay,
So you're okay with 10%?
I'm okay with it.
All right, Peter, you comfortable with that as well? Great.
Yep.
And so that's in F1B.
B.
So any other discussion about the other things? As Victor was saying, you just basically described what we had, this is under the density bonus calculation, described what we had said. Any further discussion before moving this forward?
I'll just say there's been a lot of work put into this. So like any members of the public won't necessarily see that, but there's been many, many hours and expertise.
Yeah, and the idea of moving this quickly is so Allison can be there for the joint public hearing and for the council meeting. So that would give, those folks plus members of the public more chance to hear about it and understand it. And I appreciate too that this started 2 years ago and most board members you guys weren't there. So I really appreciate that we kind of regrouped and that Allison started the process fresh. And we changed some of the density bonus table. So it was nice to have that fresh perspective as well. So this board can really buy into it. All right. If no further discussion, all in favor of initiating this as per the motion? It is unanimous. Great.
Mr. Chairman, I realized I forgot to make a motion to have you sign on behalf of the board for the Cool Corridors grant program. So can I motion to do that?
Well, I don't think we need to do that because we need to do that for the A&Rs, approval not required, because it is required that all board members sign it unless that motion is made.
Okay.
But this is just a more procedural
You
thing.
will sign. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but we don't need to. But thank you.
But there's no motion needed. Okay. Great.
Right.
Awesome.
No, that's just because the A&R it has spaces for every board member to sign. Remember we used to do that? It takes a long run too. Okay.
Awesome.
So it sounds like we're the action item C is about the other amendments we're passing on at this point. So board and staff reports. I can report that the SGIC, Sustainable Greenfield or Master Plan Implementation Committee, continues to work through the recommendations from Member School.
Adway School.
Thank you. Recommendations about changing. We're almost done with the land use chapter, and then we'll be moving on to the Eric. The
Cultural, historic, and natural
resources chapter. Yes, thank you.
So sorry.
No, go ahead.
Is the board going to review both of those at the same time once the SGIC is done with both? Or will they send them one chapter at a time?
Good question. Good question. I assume we're going to send it all at one time, but we could, if there's a request, I guess, once we're done with one chapter, we could.
It might make it easier. I mean, I'm not sure if the board would find it easier to review one chapter at a time or both at the same time.
I don't know.
Like, there's pros and cons.
Yeah, I could see doing it one at a time. That's a good idea.
So whenever we're done with this, which may be from at the next meeting, we just make it available to the board and then the board could decide to, depending on other, items we have from meetings, we could move on to it or we could, end up doing both together, but it's a good idea. Thanks. I need to check with Amy. I know she hasn't been here a couple times. I assume she's still serving on the, Preservation Committee, board or committee? Community Preservation Committee?
Amy Callahan?
Amy,
Oh, Amy, yes,
I'm gonna check in with her about,
I think she is still on that.
yeah,
Yes.
I'm gonna check in with her because we haven't seen her for a couple of days, so. But just see where things are at with it.
Can I respond to you on that, as
Who
chair
is that?
of the Community Preservation Committee?
You're in the know, please.
I'm in the know. We have not seen Amy for several meetings. So I'm not, I mean, we still see her as a member, but we have not seen her for several meetings now.
Okay,
So just so you know. Okay.
thank you. I will check in with her and see if we need to appoint another planning board representative. You're still you've been meeting for a while. I know there's at some point where the committee stops being as active. Susan?
No, unfortunately we're going into a new cycle. So we go from once a month to twice a month in the wintertime. That's the more active period, but we're active. We're monthly right now.
Okay, very good. I will check. If Amy's not available for that, which sounds, is there anyone who is interested in being the planning board representative on that committee? Community Preservation Committee?
It sounds like a really fun committee to be on. Just
It is.
It can be. I'm just trying to sell it.
To yourself or?
No, not to myself because my spouse is on that committee. So
okay.
I don't think it seems, I don't want to overlap like that, but yeah.
Gotcha. Well, I don't want to put, unless Peter or Victor, you're like, oh, I want to have fun.
Okay, that's Jeff.
You got enough? Okay.
I was just going to ask what night do they meet or what time
We've been meeting Thursday. We've been meeting the fourth Thursday of the month from 5:30 until 7. And then when we get into the review of proposals, we usually meet twice a month. And that's determined by when people are available. And if we have to, we could change the night. If we had people who couldn't make that night, we're open to changing it. We just so far have been successful with that night at this point.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I would offer assistance if needed if Amy is no longer available.
Thank you very much. That's great, Peter. Let me contact her very quickly and I will get back to you one way or the other. Because it sounds like, it's not for a few weeks, the meeting, but I will get back to you.
No, then our next meeting is actually, because of vacations and such, is actually August 8th.
Next week.
Next week, yeah.
Is that something you could do, Peter, if called on?
I actually think I have an overlapping meeting, but I may be able to make that.
Okay.
Said it's 5:30.
5:30 to 7, Susan?
5:30 to 7.
5:30 to 7, correct.
Peter, thank you very much for being willing to step up.
It'll be in the room you're in right now.
And it's a lot of fun.
It is. We're a wonderful group.
Peter, thank you so much for short notice being open to this, and I will get back to you quickly, given that the meeting is next week. Okay. Glad I asked. And thank you, Susan, for giving the skinny about that. So the next meeting date is... Oh, I'm sorry. Please. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So Eric had forwarded us an email from the COG, FERCOG, about land use planning on a watershed scale. They offered this workshop 3 times in July. Were you going to talk about that?
I went last week.
Okay, yeah. I went on July 24th. It's like Wednesday night. So I just wanted to report that I went to that, and I'd be happy to share notes or materials with the board if that would be helpful. They, just to give a very, very brief overview, they went over 3 strategies that municipal boards can use to try to improve watershed health, and particularly reducing the impact of flooding, which is definitely a serious issue in Greenfield and many places in Franklin County. So that was that.
I'd be happy to make any copies of anything if you want it from.
That'd be great.
Sarah. Make copies for the board.
And you went to the same thing?
I went, the first meeting they had up there. It was interesting. I enjoyed it.
Nice.
We were asking questions about, they were talking about log jams in the rivers, and I thought up, is there any state money for communities to clean up the logs? They're gonna try and talk to their council or something about, see if there's money available for that, to try and keep it. You know, like Deerfield, I think, is at the bottom of the Green River watershed. They're the ones that usually get all the logs. Deerfield should get some money to clean up the logs. It was interesting.
Yeah.
Question.
You had another issue.
Yeah, Al brought up an interesting thing about public access to documents. Do we have a page or a Dropbox or something? To
Yeah, the simple answer to that is I'm a one-person planning department, and we need more staff to, if we're gonna be putting stuff on the website and making it all available.
I would be
people.
glad to be the person who would send what you sent to me and post it where it needs to go. I would be glad to take that on. If there is a Dropbox or something that the public has access to. I could take the next step, because you send it to us. I'd be glad to be the person.
I mean, that would be.
Puts it out there, but as you
Yeah,
go.
I mean, the mayor's office would have to prove your access to the city's website. And
I'll talk to the mayor and see how she feels about it. So we can take that off your plate. So I don't know if that could entertain. And I see you writing lots of notes here, so I'm getting a little nervous about my acceptance of the clerk position. I appreciate it. You've been writing the whole time.
So, but that, that would be a natural extension of the clerk role to make those, because I appreciate that it's come up about access to documents like that for an informed.
Yeah, let me talk to the mayor, see if we can give you access.
Doesn't know what I need to do, and I'll be glad to be the person.
That's great. And appreciate, Eric, your your skill and your efforts, your expertise are always appreciated. So thank you. There were a couple other things that Eric had came up at the end of the last meeting, and Eric had captured in the notes from the recording. One was about, with regard to just the example of the project we looked at last month. And, it was at a stage where some of these ideas couldn't be incorporated or something like that because they had gotten along to a certain point. But the question of, does it make sense? Could it be that the planning board is kind of, we talked about the example you probably heard, Eric, of the thing across from Stop and Shop with the 2 housing.
Look at that. Section 880.8, where it says preliminary plans. I thought maybe we just change the wording, shall be submitted. There is a section there. It says, it makes a recommendation. Maybe these plans could be sent early so people can look at them, but it's just a recommendation.
In the
MDR. In the MDR, section 880 point.
Okay.
That's what we're talking about, looking at plans early on. So
we are, but this wouldn't be an MDR.
Section 880 is the subdivision regulations, and that is different. Talking about something that they do have to have the option to submit preliminary subdivision plans that you would review. And
that's a different category.
It's a whole different category of review that we haven't had one since 2006, but that is in there, and we do encourage preliminary subdivision reviews.
Right. I was just talking about jobs because we're now getting off topic. We're talking about MDR.
But that's not in MDR.
But it's in the section under.
It's 880 is the subdivision regs.
It's in here somewhere. Anyway, but before we get to part of the discussion of the MDR, was really we're trying to broaden the MDR to where we're looking at almost everything.
Well, this actually wouldn't be an MDR because this is the process, project that came before us last time.
Correct.
It wouldn't fall under major development review. But the question, Eric, was that.
But it would have because of the change in the traffic. If we looked at the MDR, there's a thing where it says any increase in traffic of more than 20% is required to be looked at by the MDR. There was no traffic in that lot at all. It's an empty lot. So any traffic that comes out of there is now an increase in the traffic. So technically, it was an MDR review, if you read the MDR.
Interesting, your response?
But my response is that that section there was deleted that you referenced from
we're
the
looking at-
library deal. And if you want to return
That's
it,
what I say,
only had to do with the expansion of buildings 20%, not traffic. Not 20%.
No, it's traffic. This one says, definitely says traffic.
No, it's a separate category that has building expansion in it.
I know, but there was one category in the MDR that
We would have
had.
never, ever in a
change in
million years applied MDR in the manner you just spoke of.
Here. Any expansion of existing use or expansion combined to existing use, okay, it's expansion, but isn't building something on something, could we consider that an expansion? It says.
See, the
20%
category has its
existing.
own threshold category, so that wouldn't be included.
This category has its own category.
No, I'm saying that the traffic is its own threshold. So this thing is talking about something else,
I'll
expansion.
talk
of
about this
building.
right here. 20% vehicle trips per day. Say, exceeds 20% of the existing vehicle trips per day. That's an expansion. I'm thinking if it's an empty lot, that's an expansion. So I'm saying,
Technically, what you point out is, but we would never make someone go through MDR if they had a vacant lot and then they had two cars. So we wouldn't do that in a million years. So that has to be corrected.
well, I guess. We should wait for the next meeting, right? This is all next meeting stuff.
Well, the MDR would be next.
Oh,
Yeah. But this was, assuming that the MDR wouldn't apply for the project we looked at last. You heard there was discussion about, oh, could you do this? Could you do that? And it was beyond the scope of what could be a condition at that stage. But, that was the question the board was having. Could we look at that earlier, comparable to the thing that was brought up by the two alternatives across from the Stop and Shop? Could the planning board be involved sooner so we could, whether or not it's, us making any decision, but we could offer input, I guess, or something like that. But I just wanted to check with you about that, Eric.
And I think the only way that can be done, that was a unique situation with Mark Leonard showing those things up in
Yes.
near Gill Road.
It did
He
seem
offered to do that.
Right.
The situation, the only way that I can see the board doing that is there's something called technical review group meeting. It's a staff meeting held during business hours. And it's before anybody submits a formal application to a land use board. That's when the preliminary conceptual plan gets discussed. The membership of the tech review group could be expanded to add a planning board member. One or two, but not a quorum.
Gotcha. That's interesting because we often get that.
Be the only way to see
Yeah.
something early on, other than the subdivision process, which
Yeah.
requires preliminary subdivision plans. But I mean, to have them come in when if it's early on and it's just a preliminary discussion, I will always suggest from this day forward that, hey, why don't you go before the planning board, present some ideas, get some input. But if they didn't want to do that, then they could just
We'd
go.
like to do that because it was.
But it would be up to them.
Yeah, it'd be up to them. And not that we could really do anything, but we were trying to, again, going back to the discussion of affordable housing, need for housing. We were just trying to maximize the amount of houses you could put on that property. You definitely could have put more on there. But it was so far gone down the road that, they were unwilling to rethink it, which is fine. I can understand that.
You see, the way I look at it is once it reaches a land use board at that stage, it's just, the movie's done. There's no more editing of the movie. The movie's finished. It's just at that point, has the movie followed all the guidelines? Has everything gone through? Has the zoning ordinance have been met? Is all the provisions of it? You check everything. Yes, check. Movie's done. There's no more editing. Yeah. The editing goes on during the tech review group meeting phase when they come in with a preliminary plan or conceptual plan. We say, here's what's going to be required for permitting. Here are some ideas. And then they submit a formal application.
So it sounds like you're bringing up the possibility of a planning board representative attending that. And you might want to think about that some more or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
But I just wanted to appreciate that you're saying that could be a way for the planning board to have some input as a representative.
It would be a good idea because our goal and our philosophy is not necessarily is not part of the technical group. So they don't even know where we are. So it'd be probably a good idea. Someone could sit there and just throw things out there and just what we're thinking.
One comment I have is I think that the design book is the ordinance and all of our land use regulations. That's the design book. That's how they make the movie. They look at They look at the ordinance and all of our land use regulations, they put it together. And then my job and your job as the board is to, did they do it by the ordinance? And it's not a design review meeting at that point saying, oh, you should change this to this, this to this, this to this.
It wasn't even that, it was maximizing the use of the land. You could probably, according to the discussion we had, you probably would have fit 4 more buildings or 3 more dwellings on that piece of property and still had a nice piece of property. Wasn't crowded, but again.
But you're designing it for them. And so my point is that they came in with a design and they don't want that design. They don't want to change the design.
Yeah.
And our job is just to make sure that design has followed all the rules.
And we can offer from, the various things we're trying to promote as a board and as to the master plan, the communities, we can always address some of those things, and sometimes people will be receptive. So, there's that. We can always change the ordinance or try to change the ordinance if we want to, have some input that way. But obviously, we see that's a fall process.
And the design review, that was the question. Was that your question? Design review, or was that?
No, it's more of a question of just looking at when they sit down on the net, in the restaurant, and draw it on the napkins, to look at it and say, okay, this is great. Did you think about this? Have you thought about an open space cluster development? Have you considered that? You can build, 13 more buildings on this if you just do this and look at that. Have you considered that? Have you considered this? That was really the focus of it, is to put more ideas into their head.
That generally does happen with the normal process going on now with my department and when they talk to me, but sometimes developers have, they may even be out of state and they just look at our ordinance and they understand ordinance. They follow the rules. Here's our design.
Right.
There's no opportunity for discussing. They just come in and say, here's what we want to do. Okay. And we followed every single regulation. Tell us how we did it.
That's the way it works.
And sometimes I've had the sense that you offer a perspective from the point of view of the community or something.
Oh, definitely. For example, if anybody ever was thinking of a subdivision, first thing I would show them was the cluster option.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
even though they wouldn't be obliged to follow that.
But they don't have to follow it.
Right.
I gave them the option.
Yeah, sure.
Nice. The other more general point that came up was Victor was talking about the idea of a public meeting with developers, and I wondered if us meeting with Amy, Director of Community and Economic Development, made any sense? And I wanted to get your
a focus group of potential developers. We know what the obstacles are and what we can maybe do to see what they are and get a better understanding of their point of view, so we can.
That's a good idea. I've seen communities do that on many occasions, and it's been successful for those communities to get some good feedback from the developers. I've seen zoning amendments arise from that and from such meetings, so it's a good idea.
And would meeting with Amy make sense as well, or?
I think Amy should be included as the economic development director.
Included in that, I see.
Well, she probably knows the developer.
And she probably knows.
Yeah, it's just a thought to try and educate ourselves and.
That's good.
Future reference.
And I just want to say one thing about this. Thank you for pointing that. I did not know that it included parking, and we got to fix that because that's.
I remember when I looked at it, and that whole section was deleted, right?
Yeah, it was deleted.
But I remember when I looked at that, and I was thinking, if we were going to, propose going back to that, it is a little vague.
Yeah.
Some wording of it.
Exactly.
You kind of think, well, that's not a major development, but you want to make sure that technically something couldn't be included under there.
So so if the board did want to bring that back, we just rethink it, be thoughtful about it, and change the wording a little bit.
You have to be thoughtful about it.
Well, certainly my intent is not for the board to slow down anything. Really not. That's not my intent. So I don't want to look at everything, slow it down. I just like to look at it so I know what's happening.
Yeah.
And also to say, thought about this.
Yeah.
That's really the goal.
Any other more general comments before we check the next meeting and potentially adjourn? Next meeting is
September 5th.
Not be in attendance. I'll be celebrating in Bermuda.
Congratulations. Whatever you're celebrating.
Our anniversary has been going now for. It's beautiful.
They probably have Wi-Fi now. No.
Yes, I think I probably
You can have a real palm tree background, not a fake.
Six is dinner out, like I took the six, but the fifth I might be. That's in my laptop.
Yeah, we'll actually see some beautiful real scenery in the background instead of these
Background, the ocean.
wallpaper back.
And what is that date?
September 5th.
Okay, very good. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn the meeting.
A second from Peter, I think. Right. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, very good. No, thank you.